Welcome to another episode of Data Analytics Chat. I'm Ben Parker, data recruiter and podcast host, looking to share knowledge and insights with the data community. Today, I'm excited to welcome Jessica Talisman, Senior Information Architect at Adobe. In today's episode, we'll explore her career journey, pivotal moments that shaped her career path, and discussion around data quality and why it is difficult to progress to maturity. Jessica, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ben. I'm really excited to be here.
Likewise, I'm looking forward to this discussion. Um, so, do you want to start off with sharing your career journey?
Sure. I definitely don't have a traditional path. I graduated with a degree in history and happened into my first role in the data space for a Steven Spielberg project. And it was a very large, new, inventive way to store and classify video interviews from World War II and the Holocaust. So at the end of the project, it was almost 11 years back to back of recorded testimony. It was a pretty phenomenal project that went on to make more impact within that space of primary history resources and assets. And so that sparked my imagination. I didn't even know library science existed, but I was working within that space. I mean, I knew library science existed, but not as like something I could go get a degree in. So I got a degree in teaching of all things. And that sort of sent me down a path. And so I worked with contracts, throughout the years. And what was interesting is like in the 2000s, I became a mom and had sort of a parallel career in yoga and gyrotonic and Pilates and had studios while also managing contracts that had to do within the digital space and organizing. I went back for a second degree in 2016, which was my master's in information and library science, because I discovered that I could get a degree in this domain space beyond just the practice. And so I continued onwards and worked as a librarian for an art college, and I was the head librarian of at an art college for 2 years, and then moved into the commercial space in 2000. And so that began, I guess, my next wave or stage of life and career. At that point, I got my first job in the commercial space, which was with General Dynamics in the Department of Justice in the US. And I was a senior taxonomist and ontologist for the Department of Justice. And that just sort of snowballed into a number of other opportunities where one opportunity built upon the next. And so, fast forward after working for Pluralsight and Overstock and Microsoft, uh, and now I work for Adobe as a senior information architect. So my practices are really founded around principles of library and information science and the organization of information and knowledge infrastructures.
Brilliant. And so, what was the motivation to sort of have that career change?
Yeah. So the motivation in part was, I decided there was so much more to learn. It was really about curiosity and formalizing my understanding and in the information and knowledge space. Even though I was working actively in that space, I felt like there was more to learn and more to understand. And so, of course, I looked at all of the different possibilities in terms of like pursuing a higher degree in in data science or in data engineering. And library science really was more of a better fit because I was really interested more beyond data of building on top of data, the idea of information and knowledge. And beyond that, in having that and wanting to have that expertise, it was really about helping to feed that curiosity. I'm a big believer that learning should never end, that part of knowledge is that continual feedback from the universe and from the world in being able to continue to build upon knowledge because humans are dynamic, not static. Knowledge is dynamic and not static. And so the real motivation was really being an active participant in that process of information and knowledge for my own development and career development. And the irony is in the pursuit of a career in that exact space of information and knowledge. So the practice is based on principle. The career is based on principle. And so to walk the talk, it was really about the journey of continuing and finding resources and ways to continue building upon and learning.
Brilliant. And I like, because I think it's probably a good time to be in data management now as well. Because I think previously, I think a lot of businesses were focusing around obviously hiring data scientists on the modeling when really the data's been neglected, hasn't it? Really, like how can we get more out of our data should be the focus, which I think businesses now are starting to realize and gradually investing more in those sort of areas.
Yes, and if we look at library science, the reason why it's such a good match and works so well with data analytics, data science, data engineering is they all come from the same principle and background. So before those practices were in place in terms of like data engineering or data science as domains or expertise, library science existed. It's existed for more than 3,000 years. It is, librarians have been the stewards of information and knowledge. I see them all as sort of integrated, and especially now that we're entering this world of Gen AI, the renewed focus on data and the necessity for data and data architecture. We're all feeling it within the industry. And AI, Gen AI tools, commercial AI tools are knowledge tools and they rely on knowledge. They're trained on knowledge, on human knowledge. And so it's much more, instead of it being siloed and appropriated only to the atoms or the molecules of information or knowledge, it's really about sort of learning how to integrate our practices and create knowledge infrastructures beyond just data infrastructures.
Yeah, and also I love it because I think it's your route is so different to, I guess, the traditional route, and I think it's obviously now data and AI. I mean, it's the field everyone wants to get into, and I think you don't have to necessarily. You can come from any direction. I think now, in my opinion, because you can obviously come from the techie route, or you can come from domain routes. I think it's going to, and it's going to keep growing, isn't it? Like you could
Absolutely.
be a specialist in marketing, then move into data, finance. There's so many options, I think. So I think for people listening, like, and people like a lot of people are struggling to get like data scientist type roles. You don't necessarily have to go that route. Maybe go down the domain route, and then you can sort of pivot later on.
Yes, yes. And there's like a ton of really great certificate type programs. Like, for example, San Jose State University in the US has a postmaster's certificate and a post bachelor's certificate in both data science and data engineering with a library science type bend, which is really nice. But yeah, you don't have to take the straight route. In fact, having more of a global or expansive view of a data ecosystem and understanding of that, those voices and those talents are needed. We need, within the data space, different lenses. Otherwise, you end up with homogenous data analytics practices. Something that's interesting that comes from the data from the library science, information science, and library science space is it's very common throughout the world to have an analyst position called a metadata analyst. It's a very normal position. And now, with a priority and a lens being on semantic layer and metadata, I think that's going to be an interesting turn or a possible burgeoning role, that of a metadata analyst, not just a data analyst, but someone who specializes in metadata. And I think that's an interesting thing to start to think about. I've seen a few positions pop up throughout the job market. And this is my prediction, is I think we're going to start seeing more of that type of role. So it's not just strict data analysts.
Yeah, I think obviously, I think there's a lot to be done with data, really. Because even if you look back, obviously you've had businesses, they've had data warehousing, didn't really get that in check. Then they moved to data lakes, didn't get that in check. And it's just gone from there, hasn't it? Really, like I think businesses still obviously I know it's a lot of money, isn't it, to do all this. So but I do think now businesses are getting to the point where they'll start investing more in actually like what can we do with our data and get it in check.
Yes.
But then also, obviously, we had the Gen AI boom, which has obviously created whole lot more data for businesses. So I guess it's going to be a race to the top who can get their data in check first, and obviously
Exactly.
maximise from there.
And I think it's shined a light on people's data ecosystems. More data is not necessarily better if you don't know what to do with it, if you don't know what it means. And so there is this motivation for businesses to start to structure or organize their data and information. And we see that reflected in companies buying data catalog, data governance platforms like Salesforce with Informatica. We see it with ServiceNow, purchase of Data.World. So it's becoming more of a priority. Some organizations are further along than others, but I think part of that motivation in that race is that if your data is not in order, if you don't have any meaning attached to your data, if you can't analyze it, if you can't disambiguate it, if you can't structure it, your company cannot advance in AI.
Yeah, no, I agree. So then, moving to the next question then. So looking back, were there key moments that shaped your career? Obviously, you mentioned you had a child, so I guess that impacted.
Yes. That definitely impacted that, and I think most of all, I mean, I will be completely transparent in terms of I've always been interested in libraries and do come from a family where, there are some librarians in my family. My dad was involved in museum space, and I think that what's important is libraries don't live in isolation. It's usually libraries, archives, galleries, art, museums. That's sort of the cultural or knowledge infrastructure of our, if you think of it from a digital context, even from a physical context, we have these cultural heritage institutions that are critical to codify knowledge. And so I think the real motivation at first and the real passion was also with a duty and responsibility. I believe that companies should have cultural or knowledge repositories. I don't see them as any different. They very happily engage. If you have customers and you have your customer base and you have personas, well, then that's like those are cultural artifacts. Those are artifacts of knowledge. Like you're tapping into the outside world. And it's really important to sort of ground our practices in reality as I think what we're learning from Gen AI. And so I'm seeing that in greater importance, that has greater importance, but also helping to create these structured knowledge repositories and infrastructures is critical to drive truthfulness and reliability in data systems. And I think that is one of the greater motivations as I was, just I think at the time when I decided to really pivot and go back to school happened to coincide with a lot of the social media misinformation online, and issues around like what is knowledge and how do we create these channels and these environments to drive truthfulness and reliability in information. So I will say it's idealistic to a point, and I am realistic about where we are as a world and society and what we're capable of doing collectively. But it still is an important underlying mission and motivation for what I do is that, my work is more than clocking in. It really is about bringing these best practices that we have done successfully for 3,000 plus years in the library and information space and trying to really thread that needle and pull it into our data practices.
Yes, I guess obviously you made the pivot. Did you feel there was a lot more room in data then that can be done?
Yeah, I felt like it was data and data science and data engineering, although I think you can date it back to the 17 to 1800s formally as a domain practice. When we think of digital spaces, one thing that I was somewhat stuck on that was a big motivating factor was library scientists were lockstep. It was library and I think at the time it was still just information science, but they were pioneers in digitization of documents. Libraries and librarians were one of the first groups to publish documents and create interconnected networks in the 90s and 60s within digital ecosystems. So, actual networked systems for library catalogs. At around the same time, we see the birth of data science and data engineering. So, that was something that intrigued me because it's not one domain's practice. The silos and the lack of, we lost sight of sort of the integration of these different tasks and talents and domains of expertise. And so I think it's much more holistic and bigger than we think in terms of what these practices are. So going from that space where I was independent and I worked on a huge art project for 10 years for this woman, Twinka Tebow, who's the world's most photographed model. Her father was the world famous artist, modern artist, named Wayne Tebow. And, if you haven't heard of them, that was really my entry point in my deciding how I made the decision to pivot into the career was I was working on this massive project to classify, catalog, and digitize this whole collection and to have it available online and to then move that into appraisals and being able to then make those assets available with all the metadata and best practices to publishers and prospective museums. And that's not a normal route into this data space, but it very much speaks to data. It involves data engineering and data science and data analysis in lots of different ways. And as the project grew and started collaborating with museums and publishers and what have you, all of a sudden I built this digital ecosystem. And, it eventually culminated into a published book. So we were successful there and a museum exhibit at the Crocker Museum, which is the California State Museum for a summer. And it was this amazing experience going through that. And that the finality of the project or when it finally got to be published and the project we'd call final, year 10, I was already working in the enterprise space. I was already in the corporate space, but it was it's the little things, those little experiences and jobs and motivations that sort of build onto the next and lend expertise and insight that can help you to discover what you really want to do or how you want to use those skills or where those skills are transferable or where you can apply them, like not being afraid to take those risks.
Yeah, and I think also, I think with data, I mean, so much can be done, isn't it? Like, obviously, let's talk data businesses. I mean, even things like video, like CCTV. That's a whole new industry, isn't it? That could be tapped into. Because there's a lot of data you can get out of that, can't you?
Yeah, I mean, you see great job posts like within even the nonprofit space or CCTV. Like to your point, there are fabulous jobs that are available in there that are not your normal sort of corporate jobs, where you can really get your feet through the door and get the necessary experience that will help you. I mean, who knows? Maybe that becomes your passion and your expertise, or maybe that helps to lead you to the area or the place that you want to be. Maybe it's a stepping
Mm.
stone towards an end. And instead of thinking of it as the finality, it really has to do with how you're building your expertise, but also your passion. And I think this was one of my motivators is when I went through my teaching program, I put the master's in teaching is that I took a seminar class in pedagogy. There's a lot of pedagogy, and it's just sort of ways of thinking or delivering information and knowledge and teaching. And Paulo Freire, who is a pedagogist from Brazil, he has a book called The Passionate Teacher. And the principle of that is that you can't be a good teacher if you're not passionate about your subject matter. And that really resonated with me. The other thing that he says is that you can't be a good teacher if you're not a good student. And so that sort of reciprocity in that process is like the opportunity to learn from others, but then also the ability to help to teach or mentor others. I think that's something that's important is to realize that the journey is, even though we're working in digital systems, that there's a human element to it.
Yeah. No, I think passion is massive because, and I think that's pretty. If you, in day, if you're in a job you like, getting paid well, and the industry excites you, you're learning. You're gonna like the job. I think there are a lot of people
Yeah.
struggle is to find the right industry. If they're not in the industry that excites them, obviously, look, you'll have the buzz of moving a job 6 months, a year, mate, whatever, to learn a new job, new role. But if it's not got that buzz, like, of course, you're going to think, this is not for me. I want to move. Like, because
Yeah.
you're going to get bored, aren't you? Like, I've had it before. Like, that's why I set my business up because I wanted something challenging. Like, it's like Groundhog Day, doing the same thing over and over. Your days feel like weeks, and it's painful.
I I actually use that Groundhog Day analogy quite a bit because it is like if the passion's not there, how can you be good at your job? You're going to clock in, clock out, and you're going to do your tasks. Or if you're forced to go beyond that, it just feels like drudgery. And really, you're better at your work and your job when you're passionate about it. You're a better contributor. It should be a two-way relationship. You're getting something from your job. You're learning. You're continuing to grow. There's growth opportunity for you. And likewise, the business is being rewarded by your skills, your input, and your talents, what you have to bring to the job. I mean, passion has everything to do with success.
Yeah. And I think also you got to. It's not you got to find your passion as well, haven't you? Really, I know it's not just you got to find it. I think is the hard bit for many people.
And it's not a straight path. I had someone reach out to me, a colleague at Adobe, and I was so impressed. And the person said, "Listen, hey, I'm taking a data governance course." It was a free AWS course, and I need experience. And it was just this like really earnest, honest. It was something that this person was doing on their own, out of their own interest, because it was something that sparked their imagination, curiosity, and interest. It's not someone that works in data governance, and I happen to be standing up a data governance project right now, and it was so refreshing to have that exchange and interest and not being afraid, even in your place within an organization, of looking within the organization towards maybe what you're interested in or what you want to do. So, in place in an organization, if you have a job and you're fine where you are, but it's not really sparking passion or interest, be afraid to look throughout where you are, your own organization. See if there are people that can mentor you and ways that you can grow. Do you have an educational fund? A lot of organizations give you a budget for education, an annual budget. Like, take advantage of those things.
Yeah, definitely. I think also, like, I was just obviously doing the podcast. Actually, learning is obviously powerful, but then also like it makes you become more. It's only going to better your career because you're becoming more rounded of the industry you're in. So if you're doing whatever field you're in, and then you're focusing, like you mentioned, a person focused on more on data governance, your understanding is going to get more, and you're going to be more powerful in your knowledge. And then that's obviously you get confidence from that, don't you, as well? So
Yeah.
then you're going to be able to build trust with team members. And who knows, you might actually want to get into that field, or it can take you on a new career path where you can just propel forward.
Right, right. And maybe it's not the exact title. That's the other thing is we can get caught up in titles, but there's some fabulous jobs that are still within the relevant space. What an organization, and that can always be negotiated, of course, whatever the title is, but not being afraid to sort of spread your wings or expand outside your direct domain and title, job title, and allow yourself to explore things that are parallel or adjacent to what you're doing. Because we're going to see job roles because of Gen AI. We're seeing new job roles pop up already. And so sticking or having this mental model of what the world has been up to this point is rigid, and having the flexibility and the imagination and the creativity to open up your lens to see what's really happening in the industry as these new job roles and descriptions start to pop up. Like, I don't think we're going to have the same world in 2 to 3 years in terms of what these job roles are. We saw very quickly, like with when AI came out, prompt engineer jobs as an example. We don't really see that much anymore, but I think we are going to see the evolution of a lot of these roles.
Yeah, and I think that's what businesses are looking for, creators, because obviously in their interests, and there's evolution, isn't it? I think things are gonna if you're picking up new skills, you're doing new things, you're evolving and adapting to the new way. And I think this is what businesses need, don't they? They need people that can move quickly, not working in old legacy ways, or you need to be at the forefront now.
Yes, and, I sort of struggle with this, and this is a little aside, is that I'm seeing, a lot of organizations continuing to push into these, like, agile sprint-focused workflows, and AI doesn't necessarily work according to those sprints. I'm seeing, personally, the emergence of design thinking, which are these iterative processes. I know that agile is also iterative, but there can be more or less iteration. The speed can be faster or slower. I'm not sure that I'm interested to see where we will go with agile because I'm seeing a lot of companies and teams struggle with normal agile processes.
Really interesting to hear that.
So I think, it's sort of expanding the lens and inventing your reality. That's one of the luxuries of Gen AI, although a lot of organizations and larger corporations are definitely stuck in these rigid old ways and legacy systems. But imagining the new reality in these new systems and extending beyond legacy takes curiosity, really. And curiosity is very much, I just find the irony of we're all struggling essentially with this knowledge tool. It's a knowledge tool. And we live in this space where we need information and knowledge. And so, really starting to think of, okay, so how can I maximize the benefits? How can I set a system up for success from a data perspective to then go through that normal pipeline of then being transformed into information and information to knowledge? Like that way of working is very different than how we've worked up to this point.
I think that touches on change, though, doesn't it? That's the change management piece, which is the hard bit, I think, for businesses.
Yeah, and no one wants to be first. It's not fun being first when it comes to change management, and it's a hard job. Um, but it's change management and culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
know it's not. It's obviously it's easier said than done, isn't it? Like, because obviously humans are great, but also everyone's different. So you
yeah.
got different personalities to deal with. It's just yeah, it's just part of obviously changing culture, isn't it? Works at a different pace.
Yes, and the human element. I mean, that I think is what is so interesting is that humans are part of knowledge, humans are part of information, humans are part of data. And we've been so excited and moving so quickly towards this like the goal of conquering AI. It's like this I call it the golden spike. And so how we get there, it involves humans, and ultimately, it's a tool that is to benefit humans. That's the thing. Just like the internet. Who's the consumers of the internet? Who are the beneficiaries of the internet? It's humans. Those are the users. Those are the personas. So that hasn't changed with AI.
True, true. Okay,
Yeah.
let's move on to the next question. So, have you ever faced a career setback? And I guess, what did you learn from it?
I have reached a career setbacks that I think, most of us are men. I shouldn't say most of us, but experiencing a layoff. That's really difficult to be part of a layoff. And so I was part of a layoff. I was working for a company called System One, and there was a layoff, and it came as somewhat of a surprise. It wasn't obviously just me, it was several other people, and it felt like a career setback. And I think that's what's interesting is like at the time, it just felt so heavy and terminal in a way. And it's easy to kind of wallow and be like, "Oh my gosh, what am I going to do next?" Like I don't, depending on your severance and where you are in that space. And that was my first experience really going through, wow, okay, how do I turn this into a benefit? How do I turn this experience into my next opportunity? Um, it was easy. I think that I was laid off in September of 2022 or 23, somewhere in there. And by November, I had to sort of pull myself up by the bootstraps and get into the game pretty quickly. And I was in a seat at Amazon by November, so September to November. So that was a pretty quick turnaround, but I will be completely honest that it took about, I think that was my first experience where I had a pretty significant setback, but at the same time, it was reimagining the job opportunities and market, sort of opening my eyes to recruiting possibilities that had come my way that I previously ignored because I was employed. It also taught me the power of network, and that was really critical.
Hmm.
Not being afraid to be human and to talk to people within your network, to expand your network, because that's what sort of led to the recruitment and the process of joining Amazon. And it was critical to my pulling myself out of that setback, but it taught me a very important lesson in the power of network and being able to be human and vulnerable and rely on others to help.
Yeah, I think you've also got to be, I guess, adult about it. You can't just be asking here everyone, or I guess you got. I guess there's a right way, isn't there? In my opinion, you can't be contacting every like person.
No, no,
You need
no.
to be doing, I know it's a hard. You need to. I guess when you do it, you have that feeling, don't you? If this is right or wrong, you need to. There's that grey area, I think, because there's a lot of people who can reach out to you expecting help when you can't. You need to just be a bit like,
Oh, that's so important, Ben. Like, that's something it was and when I say network, I should be more specific. It was people that I had developed relationships with. So
yeah,
going I had that setback, but I had been engaged in the community. I've been engaged in exchanging ideas with others and had built relationships with others where they were familiar with me and my work. That's what was important. We'd
yeah,
engage in domain specific all of a sudden popping up and when you're out of a job and asking people blindly to help you is not the way. You need to build those relationships in your network. It's so important.
yeah. Cool. And then obviously, I know that's a massive career change to go through. And I mean, that sort of thing can affect mental health, in my opinion, because it's a massive impact. It's a shock to your system, isn't it? And I think
Oh, yeah.
it's sink or swim, in my opinion.
It is
So how did you overcome that?
Well, and I will say that to overcome that, because it's easy to wallow um, in the bad things or to replay certain things that, because layoffs take people by surprise. And so it's easy to go back in your head and to wallow in the past. What could I have done differently? Was it me? Is it something that I did? How could I have done differently? And it's important to reflect, not to, that's going to put you in living in the past. And it's very easy to get stuck in that space. So I have a way, I mean, obviously, it's something that I do. I spend time outside and I try to maintain some balance. I practice yoga and I have interests outside of just my job and my domain space. So one way of overcoming was I just had to set a schedule for myself. When you have a job, you have a schedule, you have a time that you have to show up and expectations. And so structuring or having some sort of structure or discipline around your day and having ways to be a whole person. So that includes self care, not living in the past, but being forward future facing, listening to podcasts, conferences, webinars, like things to enrich and to help you learn and grow as a person. So it's all of those things that are all about mindset. We tend to get, it feeds very much into neurology and neural pathways, but you're trying to, it's really an effort. It's like you become the project and how you can help to wire your neural pathways for success. I'm not going to get into like nootropics or like any sort of, talk around that, but it's really important that if you're not well in terms of like feeling whole and being engaged and motivated and finding your path to like, some sort of balance, if a job's not creating that structure for you and that learning, that then you're responsible for that structure and creating those pathways for growth and learning. So shifting your focus all of a sudden from the job and who you are in that job to you. And then what's interesting is when you go into that next opportunity, which will happen, you may be a very different person. You don't want to join a new job and be in a really bad mental state. That's never a good start to a career.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think a lot of people do fall into that because like they just like beg for jobs. When really, you need to be. It's a test, isn't it? When you go through these situations, obviously losing a job, losing a partner, or anything, it is just a life test.
Yes.
Um, I think you do need to just, yeah, self care is important. I remember always like reading a book. the Miracle Morning, and his sort of concept was you do 60. I think there's the meditation bit, it's the silence. Then there was like exercise, journaling, visualization, affirmations, all the things to keep all the body positive, and yeah, and also reading. So you're learning because then all you're doing all these things, you are progressing as an individual. Even though you're obviously going for a bad period, you still like there's so much like even when you read a book, you're learning. You've achieved something, or you've done an exercise workout, or like yoga in the morning. In say in your respect, if you've achieved something for the day, you've not just sat and wellowed on the bed or moaned to your mum or your family, your friends, etc.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of research and around the importance of that balance and how, I mean, obviously like your health is very much a part of your productivity, your being, your mindset. Your mindset's very much a part of your job and how you can contribute. And so it's important because like ultimately you're also interacting with other people, and so to be a strong contributing member of anything, be it society or a job, that's very, very important. And I will tell you the one thing, and you asked me the motivating factor in setbacks is that in 2013, when I became a single mom and I had two kids that were at the time, I think 6 and 7. And I became the sole primary breadwinner. And that in itself could be seen as a setback, but it became an opportunity. And that's the sort of thing that we're evolving. Humans are never static, or, we're dynamic beings. That's why we move. And the same goes for, digital ecosystems or digital systems. It's the same. It's same with data. It's dynamic, not static. And so it's shifting that mindset to allow yourself the permission to care for yourself and to think of yourself and how you relate to the rest of humanity and relate to systems.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it's again, it's just, the hardest thing is twisting the mindset because I think the brains are negative.
Yes.
They just function that way. I think it's obviously you need to just twist what can you learn from this situation, what can you get out of it, and it's on that journey to get to the end goal.
Yeah, and I think one of the dangers that I've observed and experienced myself is like part of that loop or that negative self-talk or getting stuck mentally is we tend to compare ourselves to others. And
Yeah,
that's something that has come to me with maturity is that idea of stop comparing yourself to others and that your journey is your journey and unique. Um, it's really about how do you feed yourself, your creativity, your brain, your health, like finding that balance because otherwise you can't be any good to others or a job.
yeah. And I mean, I've gone through life experiences, and it's like bad, and it's end day. There's always someone out there that's got a worse situation than you, and it's
Yeah.
that you just need to you need to just sort yourself. I know it's bad saying, but you need to just grab yourself and just you sometimes just need that deep chat and look at yourself and just say, look, I need to sort myself out here.
Yeah.
Like, because unfortunately, no where everything life event you go through, it's time doesn't stop.
Yep. Yep.
And especially like yourself in your situation, if you've got two children, you've got yourself to look after, and then you've got to cater for two others as well.
Yes, yes, and, they became my cheerleaders. I mean, they were with me, if you imagine, like, I was working full time and going to grad school and had these 2 young kids. So, like, there's no greater motivator in that case. At least that's how I turned that table for myself, is it became my motivation rather than my downfall, right? Rather than
Yeah,
my it wasn't a situation, it was more than anything, like, they were as much a part of that journey, which makes it so much more meaningful. I my daughter will say, I will never, because I used to take her when, I was the director of library, of the library services. I used to take her to school, pick her up from school and take her to the library with me. And I put her to work as a 12-year-old, 11-year-old at one point. And she's like, I will never forget how to do linked data. Like, these certain things that stick with her. It's not she's upset about it, but, like, yeah, why not? Like, bring them along. Like, this becomes part of their growth and learning. They may not be interested in it now, but I will tell you that My daughter is studying psychology and research neuroscience. And so if you think about it from that perspective, like she's decided to go into a data adjacent role.
Yep. So all helps.
Yes.
Okay. So what sort of skills or traits have helped you stand out in industry?
Oh, interesting. I think, when I got my degree, part of my getting the degree was I went to a program that had a specialization or concentration in informatics. And so it was that, I really before going into my program, I knew what I wanted to do. And it was a very specific subset or lens or approach to the domain of expertise. So I think it really I was cognizant or aware based on my passion and interest. And I think that made all the difference because that set me on a path that specifically in grad school, it's bioinformatics and metadata and semantic systems. It's somewhat, I would say that when I first started within the corporate space with, that same talent and domain expertise in metadata, semantic systems, and informatics, it certainly wasn't appreciated. What has made me stand out now with Gen AI is that has become more important, more of a focus, sort of mission critical for AI. So I feel fortunate in that way. But the other thing that has stood out is with or without AI, it has consistently been my domain expertise and passion.
Hmm.
So, part of it is, it's made me stand out of just happen chance and that, wow, this coincided at the same time. However, have built that expertise out of passion and it existed before AI. So I have experience in systems, and I have experience in also the practical, the physical, bridging the physical with the digital, which is another skill set. So, following your passions and your interests leads to almost obsessive interest or building of skills in certain areas. So, specializations. Like if you can't declare, I have concentrated or specialization in these areas, or these are my strengths, you need to foster and grow those interests and strengths because that's what sets you apart. If you just say, oh, I'm a data analyst and it's just generally data analyst, but like what areas, what are your superpowers? What drives you? What are your passions? So I think that's what's made me stand out some is that obviously I have some passions and I continue to grow and learn based on those passions. It doesn't mean that tomorrow my passions aren't going to shift and change. And therefore, what makes me stand out then might change. But it's really based on fostering that growth. And I think that's what has made me stand out.
And then, I mean, how did you find what your superpower is?
I think that it was based on, that's an interesting question. I think it was based
I
on
think again, it's a lot of people do not know, in my opinion.
I think it was just a natural drive and gravitation towards these certain industries and projects. Like
Mm,
when you are growing and happy because you're given an opportunity where you're trying to really solve problems collaboratively.
mhm.
You have an end product at the end of that journey or goal. Or even if you fail, but it sparks an interest into discovering why it failed and how you could do something differently rather than just walking away from a failure. Failures can be the greatest opportunity for learning if you're willing to take some humility to go back to that problem where you failed and figure out, well, how can I do that differently and how could that succeed? Because failures are learnings. Failures easily turn into successes. So I think that's very much a part of discovering what you're interested in. If you're not willing to unlock or figure out or learn how to turn a failure into a success, I think that shows something you're not interested in. That's not your superpower. But if you're willing to have the humility and you have that level of interest to figure out, okay, this didn't work. I mean, that's the basis of research. That's the basis of science is the willingness to go back and approach the problem from a million different angles because your curiosity, your interest, and your it's something that is driving you to figure out to undo that to complete the puzzle. Because that's how we build our superpowers. Is you have to have failures in order to have successes.
Yep, I agree. It's yeah, I think you need failures, and like I said, if you enjoy what you do, I guess, like you said, Yeah, that's your buzz, and you're gonna put more effort in. End of the day, like if you've got no interest in something, of course, you're just not gonna succeed.
Yeah, I mean, like employers and hiring managers and what have you, they can feel apathy. I've been on that side of hiring, and you can feel when someone's apathetic. And it's like pulling teeth to get answers to questions, and bringing your best self into an interview, being authentic is very, very important because once you're in that seat, once you're in the job, say you get the job, they're going to have the same expectation of you, that you're bringing that best self into the job. And if you feign or are fake passionate in a certain area or interest in a certain area or having superpowers in a certain area, eventually that's going to be called to task. That's why they hired you.
Yeah. All right, then let's move on to the data topic then. So look at data quality and the difficulty to progress to maturity. So with businesses, what's the most prominent barriers organizations face when trying to build high quality, like well structured data ecosystems?
Yeah. So, it's interesting because there's been some talk within the industry about the concept of like a data center of excellence, for example. So, one of the barriers is a lack of leadership in the area of data quality and data best practices. Some companies have CDOs, chief data officers, some do not. Many do not. Some companies have CTOs, some don't. But it really has to be top down and bottom up. It can be a little bit like herding cats because you have lots of different practice areas and domains of expertise, right? You're going to have data science, data engineering, machine learning, like everyone touches data. And so there has to be unifying principles, data governance, data quality, data centers of excellence, whatever you want to call it. There has to be leadership around it. So if there are no codified and governance around data quality, um, if there are no standing principles around what constitutes data quality, if there are no processes for data cleaning or data hygiene, it's going to be very hard. Everyone's going to have a different definition of what data quality is and what those requirements are. So it is having sort of the rules, the laws, and the expectations that are both bottom up and top down that sort of permeate throughout an organization. It's like a binding contract. And many organizations are afraid to have those binding contracts or overall governance. We're all in a position and are pretty familiar with organizations that drive from build fast, break things. Give me the data now. Like these sort of like very urgent calls. And we are not in the practice of having these common understandings and agreements within organizations where we are all driving forward based upon these same base rules and understanding of what data quality is.
So is that due to a lack of leadership or business just taking control of it and just
Yep.
rolling it out? Is it just a lack
Yeah, I mean there
the
has
risk?
it's yeah, I mean it's someone that has to have leadership buy-in. That's part of the problem because otherwise you're going to have different organizations, Adobe, 40,000 people, you can imagine how many different organizations there are and how many products. It's a semblance of, acquisitions. So you have a lot of autonomy across Adobe and practices and product specific. And so there needs to be an overall leadership and initiatives that gather everyone's sort of understanding. Like, for example, having a data governance summit, being able to share across an ecosystem, supporting interoperability, having methods of and making tools available and processes available for data cleaning. A lot of data practitioners, it hasn't really been a thought, or our idea of cleaning data is like deduping and calling it done. That speaks to all of us having different ideas and definitions for what that is. And I will give the example that I think is very valuable is in library science, because we can draw from other domains and domains of practice. In library science, part of cataloging, part of data practices, informatics, metadata, is that codified into your workflow and process are these sort of data quality and data cleaning or hygiene workflows. That's very much a part of the workflow. And we don't really have those in corporations as much, that you have to go to through step A, step B, step C. And this is like the ideal, or the definition of data quality, is that you've gone through these sort of hygiene practices, and that you're adhering to certain governance principles, and you're making them available in a catalog, and your metadata is, you have metadata. Let's not even talk about the quality of metadata, that there's actually metadata available so that you can support interoperability. So documentation, things like that. I mean, like, how many organizations move forward with zero documentation for systems and processes or data initiatives? Just lacking basic documentation. The creation of silos, like, how do we break down silos? It's a very complex issue, but from my experience and observations and talking to others, it really comes from leadership, and then being able to operationalize and initiate programs from the bottom up.
Yeah, and I mean, would you say it's because obviously you get that, like, data engineering roles, data quality is an aspect to the position. Is it just those, and like even like data leaders roles? Obviously, they have data governance, but
Mhm.
then even now they're starting to become more of a separate position. So, is it in the past businesses have just they've just overlooked it? Then it's just been
It's
too
just
much. They probably had too much work, and then obviously the data quality is just and the documentation part has just been sort of
over.
sidetracked.
Yeah. And, not creating available assets. Like, when you work in silos and you don't have sort of unifying principles and expectations and requirements across a data development environments, then you end up having very different standards and expectations across an organization. You can have an area of your organization or team, and the leader of that team has expectations and requirements for documentation and data quality, but then it's not consistent, because the team adjacent to you or the team across the organization may have very different processes and expectations and requirements. So, creating governance, creating available interconnected tools of being able to share and share alike. In the library and information science space, we call it FAIR, which is findable, accessible, interoperable, and retrievable. That is a principle. That just having that simple, fair principle is the beginning of something like data governance, is the beginning of an initiative like data quality.
I think even over recent years, you've seen start to see more like data governance type positions come pop up. So I expect that will grow in years to come as well, and
Yes.
it's going to be even a separate entity, like complete. Because again, that's where a lot of focus needs to be going. Really,
Yes, and something that's important to realize, and I see organizations doing this all the time, is they have data governance, but it's very narrow. It's only focused on classification and security. That's it. Or over a software catalog and vendor specific things. That's Data governance is more holistic. It's not just security. It's not just your SLAs and your catalog of available tools. It extends beyond that into data quality. And I think that the industry is maturing to understand that, or starting to understand that. But data governance is really way more holistic than just security.
okay, interesting. So then, what I mean, why is progressing from like basic data management to a mature, scalable ecosystem such a change for most companies? Then,
Oh gosh. I think it is very much, we get stuck in these processes, and it sort of parallels the speed of production, the expectations from leadership, and what we have the bandwidth and the time for. And I think something else that has happened is that with the most recent rounds, in the past 2 years, there's been like huge casualties in terms of layoffs. I hear a lot of people talking about, oh my gosh, my one job has become two jobs, or my responsibilities and my job description has grown beyond what I can manage on my own. The justification from the business is, oh, because of AI, we're automating jobs. But the reality on the ground is that people are just being assigned more work. The automation dream is not quite there. So, there's somewhat of an imbalance, and it really has. And so when we have this expectation in the speed of production and reduced human capital, like, how do we have time or space to think of data quality, or we can't mature our systems well if we don't have the human capital to, because it's humans ultimately that have to do it. AI can't automate that. So in order for us to change our ways of working and to build data governance and data quality initiatives, fortunately or unfortunately, humans have to do it.
Yeah. And yeah, no, I hear that all the time. Obviously, people getting more work, and it's obviously, I guess, only a certain amount you can do, isn't it? Really.
I
I
mean,
guess it'd
well,
probably be that sort of the governance would be the data quality aspect would be neglected because you've got so much work, and if
well,
that's not been input, like obviously it's important, but if it's not been high priority in the past,
is
things will
data
can't continue.
Is data governance like one of your deliverables? Is it what are the sprints? Like how are you roll, like you think of it in the workflow, it's like, oh gosh, I have to get this done by this date. And then that falls right after this milestone. And if I don't get this dashboard up by whatever, we're overloaded with those tasks that are very focused on just continue, building the pipelines and getting product out and getting features out. It's this sort of wild race towards this end, and we're just overlooking the fundamentals.
So then, how do issues like siloed data, inconsistent standards, or lack of data governance like contribute to poor data quality?
So, for example, if we don't have requirements in terms of everything must have metadata or requirement keys in terms of like that there's a bare minimal standard for data quality and surfacing, for example, metadata or using certain naming conventions like the semantic layer that everyone is speaking about right now, which is still somewhat contentious. But when we don't have these standards in place, it's very easy to overlook data quality. I mean, that plays into data quality. And the silos, we've been allowed to have, we hear data ownership quite a bit within our organizations or within our practice. Data ownership and that responsibility of owning data also contributes to how are you going to make that data available and useful within an ecosystem beyond just collecting the data. That's another place that where silos are exist because of a lack of insight, foresight, and hindsight. So we're not thinking of the actual utility of the data and how we're going to make that data useful. And that plays into how do we make that data useful? Well, gosh, it needs to be quality data, right? In order to make it useful, you're going to have to dedupe it, you're going to have to clean it, you're going to have to make it meaningful in some way. And then you're going to have to make it available. It's findable, accessible, interoperable, retrievable. If we think of that fair data practice. And so we've been in these sort of systems, and I think it comes a lot from sort of that big data movement of collect as much data as you can because data is the new gold, without
Hmm.
any real thought of like, well, then what? Like, what do we do with the data? We've collected it. Now what? And so it's the actual practice and stewardship of that data that has been overlooked. So as much as like if I go and you think of just the process of going to the grocery store and emptying out your bags and putting your groceries away, some things go in the refrigerator, some things go in your cabinet, like there's an order and a process to it. It doesn't just end at going to the grocery store. And so the idea is having these processes, these bare minimal, minimally viable processes is where it starts of like how we can classify and make meaning of this data and put it in the right place and make it available and make it retrievable and make it interoperable. That's how we break down silos, is helping to build those practices. It's not a one and done. People, obviously, when you set up new processes and practices that are very different from what we've been doing in the past, it takes adoption, it takes training, it takes upskilling, it takes common understanding, and it takes agreement. And that part of it is the very human process. But because the data landscape is changing thanks to AI, it thankfully is shining a light on the need for these practices because AI ultimately requires data that has meaning. And for us to operationalize and do anything in the digital ecosystem these days in the data space, it's almost impossible to do anything without data. And that means meaningful data. So, it's human in that we have to change the ways that we work. with data, and we have to change the ways we work with each other. We have to change the ways that we work with machines.
So then, should businesses be investing more in things like knowledge graphs then?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I'm a big fan. I'm not impartial because that's what I do for a living, but knowledge graphs allow more flexibility. The trick is making those knowledge graphs operational and useful. Um, it's creating bridges. We have to. I think the greatest problem to solve is having these dynamic. The thing about knowledge graphs is they don't follow normal relational database patterns, right? Where you have a table of primary keys, foreign keys, these dependencies, and syntax heavy, meaning that it's SQL or Postgres or whatever. And because knowledge is dynamic, a knowledge graph sort of unlocks and is more descriptive. It adds context and meaning to data, and it doesn't have the same dependencies as a relational database. I think the most interesting problem to solve in the data space right now is how do we bridge those two worlds to make them interoperable and to make that's a silo to be broken, and it's a problem to be solved. So I think knowledge graphs lend a lot of meaning to an organization, but only if a knowledge graph can be integrated into a data ecosystem in a meaningful way and be made available to users in some form or fashion, like a natural language interface or API connections or whatever those bridges are, that needs to be there in order for knowledge graphs to be meaningful.
Brilliant. No, I like that. And I mean, it's for a lot of our clients, we're all starting to become more popular and we're getting more requests with that. So then, what does a mature data ecosystem look like? What would be the key milestones along that journey?
Well, not to hammer the point home, but I do think that FAIR is important. I think having, which is the findable, accessible, like kind of operating from that principle is very important because the idea of breaking down silos only comes when you have the principles in mind. There's something else I want to bring from the library space that I think is a really important quality for what a good data ecosystem looks like, which is that you have a service minded approach. Rather than thinking of winning the race, you're thinking of how you contribute to the greater ecosystem and how you are contributing to the interoperability of your data ecosystem or the availability of your data. And so within library science, everything you do is from a service minded approach. And if you mentally think of it as I am providing a service to others, that opens up your ears and your mind to understanding how you impact the larger ecosystem. Like you have to have self awareness. What value are you driving rather than outside of a certain feature or a certain dashboard or a certain product? Like start to think about how your work can impact other data products or other data features or other dashboards within an ecosystem. So it's really a collaboration model. That's one of the qualities of a really healthy data ecosystem is having collaboration models in place. Interestingly, when I was at Pluralsight, I think they had a very, very good model and they called the main data, it was a Postgres database, and they called it the DBS, the data vascular system. And they really looked at the data ecosystem in general, all of the different contributors, all of the metadata throughout the system was like the connective tissue. And so there was a real drive to come up with a way to make data interoperable and to have everyone contribute and to have these sort of value vocabularies and ways of working together, to break down silos, to have communication that drives the interoperability so that we are helping each other from a service minded approach. So it has everything to do with how the human mindset within an organization that you're not doing this just for yourself or your local team or a specific product or feature, but also looking globally at data as a practice. It's a practice, and we're all contributing to this community of practice. And so there has to be agreements in place. There has to be governance in place that helps to drive those decisions. A good data ecosystem has data quality parameters. There's an interest in helping others in the space and how we contribute to the greater good. And it's not a one and done. So you also have to look at scale and be open to changes that you have to make locally to impact the global data ecosystem.
Great advice and insight there. Okay, let's end on what advice would you give to leaders who want to drive real progress in their data quality, ecosystem maturity?
Interesting. A lot of data leaders and leaders in general are really hyper focused on agentic AI, and they're putting or AI initiatives. They're putting that in front of data initiatives to a fault. And when we look at spend in the AI space and the budgets, and there's some great reports from Gartner and EY and that have been out on the market in terms of corporate investment. Leaders are very much are responsible for spend and investment and budgets. And so we're putting the cart before the horse. We're not thinking of data as the precursor and the necessary step before getting to something like agentic AI. You cannot have an autonomous system if you don't have your data sorted and described and in order and interconnected. Without a data ecosystem, you have no agentic AI. So, very much including data quality and data infrastructure and information infrastructure and knowledge infrastructures as part of the strategy. So, my advice for leaders is to really start to think about your data strategy as part of your AI strategy.
Yeah. And I think it's agentic AI. Obviously, I know it's a lot of impact going about. It's still the new shiny toy, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. But no, I think that we will see some interesting reckonings because
Mm,
something behind the waves of layoffs that we've been seeing is like it inevitably has everything to do with wasteful spending. And that wasteful spending is in the areas of just I understand there's experimentation and attempts with AI systems and products and features and whatever else. But that's where it's like that money would be much better spent sorting out your data ecosystem and preparing it for AI instead of wasting the money on all of these experimental and splash in the pan projects that have amounted to nothing. It's all the prototypes and all of the I understand the experimentation and getting your feet wet and understanding the tools and the space, but data first. I think that that has resounded throughout the industry and from large consultancies and analysts have proven that fact. Yet it's like we just keep on running into that wall. And they're inextricably tied, that humans, there's human casualties associated with this indiscriminate spending. And so that really, really important to understand that I don't know how to say it any louder is that your data strategy is completely tied and the precursor to any success in any AI project or agentic AI initiative.
yeah. Brilliant. Cool. Well, Jessica, it's a pleasure having you on the podcast. Obviously, congrats to you for your career today. And you shared some great advice and insights on today's show.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. This was really fun. I appreciate it.